We had one of the slowest June housing markets on record. Sales are down and inventory is way up. But if you read the headlines lately, you'd think that we're on the brink of recovery, with the turning point supposedly just around the corner. So what's really going on? Let's break down the numbers and cut through this spin. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver just released their June 2025 market stats, and they say the market is showing emerging signs of recovery. Why? Well, because in June 2025, the sales were about 9.8% lower than June 2024. And if we compare that to May 2025 to May 2024, in May, the sales were about 18.5% lower year over year. In other words, in a month, the market got slightly less bad. At least it didn't get worse. And that's where all this positivity is coming from. And personally, I like to be very optimistic about the market. I'm not here to spread doom and gloom, but I think we have to look at the market realistically. Otherwise, we're doing ourselves a disservice. I've gathered raw statistics for the last 10 years. I put them into graphs of my own. And my hope is that by the end of this video, you will have a much better understanding of what's actually happening in Vancouver's real estate market and where it's likely heading to next. First, let's look at the sales figures for every June for the last 10 years since 2015. And if we look at over the years, we can see that the slowest months was actually 2019 with 2,077 sales. June 2025 was actually second slowest with 2,181 sales, which is in general pretty good news. However, if we also add inventory levels for the last 10 years to this graph, we can start to see that the picture is getting worse, because in June 2019, there were a total of around 15,000 units listed on sale. And as I said, 2,077 of them sold, as opposed to June 2025, we have over 17,500 homes listed for sale, and again, almost 2,200 of them have been sold. Which brings us to the next graph, months of available inventory over the last 10 years. I think this is a very important statistic. Essentially, it tells us if no more listings come to the market, we just remain at the same level of inventory and the sales remain the same, how many months would it take to clear all the inventory? How long would it take to sell everything out? And here we can see how the months of inventory have been changing over the years. Of course, 2015, 2016, and 2017 have been fairly busy months. So we see pretty low months of inventory numbers. Then that number climbs in 2018 and 2019. 2019, as I said, was one of the slowest Junes on the record. But in June 2025, the things are even worse. We have over 8 months of inventory. So in other words, even though we did have less sales in June 2019, in June 2025, things are a lot worse because we have way more inventory and the sales are very similar, which leads us to a much higher months of inventory number. And that's comparing June 2025 to June 2019, two very slow months. If we compare it actually to last year, that's what the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver is doing. The things are much worse for us because last year we had in general under 6 months of inventory. Now we have over 8 months. That's actually a pretty big difference. In fact, we have some of the highest inventory we have ever seen on the market. Okay, so that in itself is not looking too great. Now, if we zoom in into the year 2025, maybe things get better. So let's actually do that. If we look at the total number of sales in 2025 from January until June, we can see that the sales have actually been climbing all the way until May, and now they have gone down slightly. And usually in June, July, you have a bit of a slowdown in sales as more people start going on vacations and as the number of listings drops. However, if you look at the number of listings, the total number of inventory on the market for this year since January until June, we can see that the number of listings has actually increased each month because the inventory is just not getting cleared. So more and more inventory is coming to the market, but the sales are not there to sort of clear all this inventory as it comes. And that's why this graph is starting to look like that. So even though the sales have sort of flattened out, the number of inventory keeps increasing, which again is not very good news. And if we look at the next graph, months of inventory, we can see how all of this is playing out. Over time, the months of inventory just keeps on going up and up. So I don't see the same optimism that the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver sees and that a lot of news outlets see, unless we see a huge increase in the total number of sales or a lot of this inventory gets taken off the market. This number will just keep growing or at the very least stay flat for the nearby future. And if we look at the prices since the beginning of this year, for detached houses, they remained pretty much flat. There has been a bit of an increase until March, and ever since then we have been on a downwards trajectory. And in my opinion, if we continue seeing such slow sales and high levels of inventory, this graph will just continue going down and down. However, the prices are not dropping as rapidly as you would assume they would be dropping given such slow market conditions. If we look at the prices for townhomes, they have pretty much stayed flat. There is a slight fluctuation months over months, but in general, the demand for townhomes is still fairly strong. And that's exactly what I see from my personal experience. And the reason why townhouse prices have been so resilient is because very few investors are actually interested in townhouses. These are usually properties that have been bought by families, and families are a lot more sort of resilient and less so affected by the market fluctuations, because you need a place to live. If you have 2 kids, you need a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom townhouse. Well, you will still buy it no matter where the market is. On the other hand, if you're an investor, you can wait out the purchase. You don't really need to buy anything until the conditions are right. Which brings us to condos. You can see the condos had similar fluctuation to the detached houses. Since March, they have been actually on a downwards trajectory, but overall, the fluctuation has not been as bad as you would expect, especially with such a slow condo market conditions, especially with everything that's going on in the pre-sale market. And of course, I have done several videos about developers going bankrupt, people backing out of their contracts, and the appraisals of brand new properties coming in well under the purchase price from a few years ago. Of course, check out those videos if you are curious. And what might surprise you, actually, condo prices have been relatively stable since 2018. So here's the benchmark condo price for the last 10 years. Of course, 2015, 2016, 17, and 18, we have seen crazy price increases. The condo price has pretty much gone up 300,000 from 400,000 benchmark price in 2015 to 700,000 benchmark price in 2018. However, over the next few years, it has gone up and down. We have seen some price increases in 2022, but it hasn't gone up as drastically. Now, I know it still has gone up, and this is unwelcome news, but we haven't seen these crazy price jumps like we have seen with other property types. Here's the price graph for townhouses over the last 10 years, since 2015. We can see similar jumps in prices from 2016 to 2017 to 2018. Then we have a similar dip between 2018 and 2020. And then we see another jump in prices for the next 2 years, 2021 and 2022. And ever since 2022, the prices have stayed relatively flat. So again, the two graphs side by side, as you can see, the price fluctuations are a lot bigger in the townhouse market. The prices have gone up significantly in the townhouse market as opposed to the condo market. And it is a similar story with the detached houses. As you can see, we had a huge price jump from 2015 to 2016. It was just incredible that the prices stayed somewhat flat until 2018, that they have gone down 19 and 20, just like the other two markets. And then the prices have jumped a lot in 2021 and 2022, of course, due to low interest rates, COVID, and everything else. You already know the story. And since 2022, just like with the townhouses, the prices have stayed relatively flat. So needless to say, I'm not exactly sharing the optimism that's coming from the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver. Of course, time will tell, but at the moment, I don't see too many signs of recovery yet, especially with some of the news that we have gotten in June. First of all, we have seen the interest rates remain unchanged. So the Bank of Canada decided not to reduce interest rates, which plays a key role on the overall demand of real estate in Greater Vancouver. We have also seen the unemployment rate rise in Canada and specifically in BC. In BC, it hasn't been as bad as the rest of Canada, but we have still seen an uptick in the unemployment rate numbers. The other statistic that has recently come out that might have a pretty big implication on the housing market, the fact that the population of Canada has remained virtually flat in the first half of 2025. I think this is the very first time in the modern history where the population hasn't actually gone up. And of course, a lot of that is due to the government policies and interventions. This is all by design. This is not just something that happened out of nowhere. The expectation is that we will see this sort of 0% population growth for the next little while to give us time to catch up with our infrastructure and all the other services that need to be provided to growing population. Lastly, the rents have gone down in the month of June. If you look at rentals.ca, the website that tracks rents across Canada, we can see that the rents have dropped across whole Canada by 3.3%. In Vancouver, rent drops have been more significant, 4.8% for the one-bedroom apartment and 7.4% for a two-bedroom apartment. In Burnaby, the numbers are even worse. And generally speaking, Vancouver, North Vancouver, Coquitlam, Burnaby, they're still the most expensive cities to rent across Canada, but the rents are slowly coming down. And again, I did a whole separate video talking about rents and the struggles that landlords are facing right now. And once again, I will leave a link to that video in the description below. Check it out if you're curious. I appreciate you watching this video all the way until this point. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. I know statistics videos can be a bit boring. I try to make it as interesting as possible, but there's only so much you can do, and a lot of work went into creating these graphs and putting this together. So I would really appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up, and of course subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss more videos like this when they do come out. If you're a first-time home buyer in Vancouver and you don't know where to start, I have an absolutely free buyer's guide linked in the description below. You don't need to sign up for anything. It's just sort of a guide that explains the timelines, the expenses, etc. So once again, the link to that will be below. And if you're not a first-time home buyer, but you still need some real estate advice about buying or selling here in Greater Vancouver, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to help if I can. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.